Welcome to COASTER-net Uncut. Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another episode of COASTER-net Uncut. Now, you may notice that we are in a few different locations here than our normal spot. I'm actually hailing from Maumee, Ohio, just right outside of Toledo. Mommy! And Danny, where are you at this evening?
I'm actually home, in a little town called Schnecksville, right outside of Allentown. I'm planning on headed to Dorney Park in the morning, maybe do some Halloween haunts. High school football tonight, so the family, we're just milling around here this evening. My dad back there. Yeah, you're good. So, and you're in your hotel lobby, right? So we're probably gonna have people walking behind us throughout the night, but that's okay. That's why it's uncut, right?
I'm unfortunately right next to the bathroom over here, so I'm expecting some real
flushing. It's you.
And that, and I think the bar's about to close, so we might see some pretty colorful people coming by here. We'll see what happens.
We might have to take a live look in to see what the bar people are like on their way out. This is gonna be fun.
It's gonna be fun.
Oh boy.
Oh, so I'm not joking about that either. So anyway, as you probably guessed, you're watching COASTER-net Uncut, where every week we take a look at the theme park industry and the rides that we love, to just get a little sense of what they're all about, talk about them a little bit. And tonight, I think we have a very, very special topic. There's a reason why I'm actually in Toledo right now, and that's because tomorrow I'll be going to Cedar Point, and of course this weekend is Mantis's last stand, where people will be taking their final rides on Mantis before it becomes the new floorless coaster named Rougarou. And we said, well, maybe this is a good opportunity to talk about what is a credit, because a lot of people are debating right now if Rougarou will actually count as a new credit on their track record. So if for those of you who don't know, that you've been living under a rock, you missed the 3 months of anticipation and the 2 different announcements for this ride. So if you've missed all of that, what's basically happening is Mantis was built in 1996 as a stand-up roller coaster by B&M. Opened as one of the tallest stand-up roller coasters. Is probably, I also think, the tallest loop at the time as well. And since then, I want to say it was the tallest loop when it opened up.
Could have been.
And since 1996, a lot of people have basically derided the ride and said it's not that comfortable, it's very painful to some people. And there's a whole lot of people out there who just don't like it. So the park made the decision this year after a lot of people have been speculating about it for years and years and years. People have been speculating that that Mantis should be turned into a floorless coaster that people generally tend to enjoy. Obviously, in comparison, they enjoy it a lot more than the stand-up roller coasters. I know me and you have talked about this in the past, how the floorless coaster is not our favorite design by B&M, that for the most part, it's okay. So some come to mind of this, this floorless design. First and foremost might be, in my book, I think Superman Krypton coaster down at Fiesta, Texas is usually regarded as one of the better ones.
One that
I know a lot of people on the... Really? Because it was closed when you were down there, right?
Yeah, it's closed during the Christmas event. So that's one that have yet to get on. I think another one you're probably going to mention are Dominator. Dominator is one that I usually put up a little higher. Kraken, I think, has its good and bad days. Sometimes it rattles, sometimes it doesn't. And when it doesn't, I think it's one of the better ones. The one at Dorney that, I'm used to riding is Hydro, which is probably one that people don't enjoy as much. It's rather tame for the B&M breed, I think. Might be the most unique of any of them in terms of the elements and the layout. But after that first JoJo roll, I think you get kind of a mediocre ride when you know what you come to expect, a more intense ride, and Hydra isn't as intense as some of the bigger ones, I think. So, those are a couple of them. What other ones come to mind for you? That are real notable?
I would say that none of them, like after the ones we just mentioned there, I would not say that any of them are really outstanding, although I've been on quite a few. Bizarro at Great Adventure,
Right.
The Dark Knight at New England, Scream out at Magic Mountain.
Well, and they're not
None
bad.
of them.
Let's be clear.
They're not bad.
They're not bad rides. They're not. I wouldn't put them in the same category as I would a lot of the inverts like Banshee and Montu and Alpengeist and Raptor and Talon. They're not in that same discussion for me personally. I would much rather take the inverts in pretty much every case. But that being said, the floorless coasters are still good rides.
Yeah, and I would probably say at best, I think my highest floorless is Superman Krypton Coaster, which probably comes in right around 50 or so out of 300. And then the rest probably would file in somewhere between 50 and 80 or 90. So you're talking about the upper third of roller coasters.
Which is good.
Which is good, in comparison. I just don't think that they're world beaters. And like we've said before, you've said it that the design of the train makes them real light, that it makes it difficult for that ride to have any real weight behind it, which sometimes can, hinder its experience where it, like you said, it rattles a lot sometimes. I just think you just don't get as forceful of a ride on a lot of them. They're almost too light where it's like, and obviously there's exceptions. Obviously Dominator, people are going to say, oh, that's forceful. Yes, it's forceful. I get it. But in general, I do not rank them as highly, as other people do.
I'll tell you what, the one that we haven't mentioned that I just want to mention because I wrote it back in June, for the second time that I've made a trip out there is Medusa out there at Discovery Kingdom.
Oh.
That one was remarkably smooth and was very, very good. And again, not quite as intense as like a Montu or an Alpengeist or a Banshee, but still had its good, intense moments and also had its free-floating moments. Medusa was one of the better ones that I've been on, the one at Discovery Kingdom. That one has aged remarkably well, considering how shaky some of the other floors were. I thought that Scream at Magic Mountain was very, very painful, and I know other people who said that was probably it's my least favorite B&M because it rattled like crazy, and maybe I just had a bad ride on it, but it jackhammered, it rattled, and maybe Magic Mountain just doesn't take care of it the way they should, but I just remember not having – I only rode that one once on that trip. I just do not remember having a good experience with it. So getting back to now Mantis and Rougarou, the question I think that you and I have been throwing around for the last few weeks in discussion, because we knew we were going to do a show about this a few weeks back, and I think the question that you and I had for each other was – how much will this actually improve the ride experience? If it's true that they're making this decision because they're getting complaints about how painful Mantis is for certain people, whether it's leg pain or the bicycle seats, for us gentlemen, that it's probably not quite comfortable. I'm not saying it's comfortable for the lady listeners and viewers out there either, but if that's the reason for this, then okay, I can see where it's going to improve that because you're sitting, you don't have the bicycle seat. But for me, it's not even the leg pain or the bicycle seat that bothered me on Mantis. And for the most part, I've never had a problem with Mantis or most of the other stand-ups. Some of the older ones are earboxing a little bit, but like Green Lantern and Mantis and Georgia Scorcher's phenomenal. I rode that one back in August. Riddler's Revenge I thought was by far the best stand-up. It had the big elements like a Green Lantern and a Mantis, and it had the smoothness of a Georgia Scorcher. But for Mantis, I think a lot of people, the biggest complaint is the head banging. And making it floorless, I don't know would
It's not going to
necessarily
change that.
alleviate that. So I'm curious to see how much this improves the ride experience. I think it'll improve it some for a lot of people, but for maybe someone like me who didn't mind the stand-up aspect of it, I'm wondering if it'll really improve it that much in my book.
Well, here's where I think it is going to improve the ride, and it's both of these things is really not for the rider. One, it's going to improve operations.
Yes, that's very true.
Dispatching Mantis has always been a nightmare because people don't follow instructions. They don't stand up straight. They want to sit down, and it always takes forever. They had to take the third train off of it because they couldn't accommodate the 3 trains anymore, that it was screwing up the whole system of going way over their time limits or whatever. And also, I think by turning into a floorless, by having it just be a sit down, that I think more people will be open to the idea of riding it. That I think people, kind of with a stand up, once you ride a stand up, they're not, usually for me, they're not rides that I look at, oh, I want to go on that again. Whereas a floorless, it's sitting down, you might want to rewrite it. And you might find more ridership in people that are more willing to ride it multiple times a season, versus with some people just saying, okay, I rode it once a season or I rode it 2 years ago, I'm good for now. I think you're just going to naturally see more people ride this, even if the headbanging's still there, even if the extreme positive forces are still there on the back half. I still think people will ride it more simply by eliminating the stand-up. Now, for me, when I was first listening to what was going on, when they were still hinting at things, I was like, I don't know. I don't know if this is the route to go. I even said it in one of my blogs that I did not feel that turning this into a floorless was the route to go. It's done. It's over with. However, I do kind of like the aspect, and they've only hinted at it so far. And I think it's the most interesting part of this. I don't think the floorless trains are the most interesting part. What I do think is the most interesting part is the fact that they're trying to make it into a night ride. And a night ride is something, Cedar Point's rides are all great at night, but there's none that gives that truly night experience. You go down the block, down to Kings Island, and you got 2 rides now that are well regarded as great night rides with lighting, with the Beast. You're in the middle of the
You have to ride them at night to say that you've ridden that. The Beast and now Banshee. Yeah. And, people enjoy Diamondback too, but I think Banshee is a little better than Diamondback at night in general.
Absolutely.
But the Beast, you have to ride at night. If you ride the Beast during the day and don't ride it at night, it's like you haven't ridden the Beast. That's what it's like.
Yeah.
Cedar Point doesn't have a ride like that. You're right.
Yeah, exactly. Like many of their rides ride a lot better at night, but there's none of those. If you don't ride this ride at night, it's not like, oh my goodness, I missed something. Right? So I really think that aspect of Rougarou now is actually the most interesting aspect, and it's also the aspect that they've played down the most. So I think there's more to this story still. I don't think, we've been told things like lighting. We've been said things like fog. But we don't really know to what extent, and we don't really know how that's going to play out, if there's anything else being brought in. I don't know if we've seen the whole picture of this yet, and I don't think we will until opening day. I think that's when we'll really get a sense of what this ride's all about. And I'm kind of excited for that, kind of excited to see how that plays out, to see if it truly is a night ride. And it has the location. It goes back into the back by Millennium, and then over the old paddle wheel lagoon, and you have a lot of darkness back there. So at night, it's going to be really dark. So I think it's going to be a really good night experience if they do it well. I'm really interested to see what they do, how they do it. But the better question here is getting to the heart of the matter. Is it enough to count it as a new credit? And let me first preface this by saying I haven't made up my mind yet. I don't know if it counts as a new credit. So I think we're going to have a little I am completely undecided. There's some days where I'm like, sure, I want this to be a new credit. And there's some days where I'm like, man, I don't see how it counts as a new credit given how I count everything else. And I think that's where we have to start this discussion at, is how, this is a big topic, and obviously we only have about an hour here. But how do we go about counting credits? And I think the biggest debates come in a few areas that we always see debates over racers, and do they count as 1 or 2 credits? We see debates over powered coasters, whether they be Intamin powered coasters, or we see the extended discos, or we see regular discos, or we just see like mine trains. That there's a whole bunch of rides that are completely powered throughout.
Yeah, the Mac ones. Mac Rides does the mine train ones. Canada's Wonderland has one. Europa Park,
Alton has one.
Yeah, exactly.
Europa has one. Alton has one.
So I mean, they're widespread. Well, not widespread, but there's enough of them out there that you probably know of one. It's called I think it's called Mine Ride in Roller Coaster Tycoon 2. There's a mine train coaster, and then there's just Mine Ride or Powered Mine Ride. That's the one we're talking about with that.
So okay. So let's start with racers, and I know you count them as 2, and I don't count them as 2. And people always talk to me.
Well, you kind of do.
Well, I kind of do. You're right, because I kind of count some racers as 2. And there's only a few examples of those in my book. And the 2 biggest ones are Lightning Racer at Hershey, and also Dragon Challenge down at IOA. And I don't even know if you can count Dragon Challenge as a racer at some point, because of the vastly different layouts and elements in it. That to me, Dragon Challenge is 2 completely different rides.
They just happen to coexist in the same space, I think.
Exactly.
And that's how Lightning Racer is after the first couple hills.
Yeah. And to me, it's like they're completely different rides. So I count them as 2. Now, a ride like Gemini or American Eagle or any of your Rebel Yells or standard racers that you have, I count as 1. And I've always gone back to during the Coaster Wars, when everyone was all hopped up on how many coasters people had, there wasn't a single park. The 2 major parks were Cedar Point and Magic Mountain going back and forth. They both have racers, and neither insisted on counting them in the total track counts. That both parks counted their racers as 1. And for all the RCDB junkies out there who say, I use RCDB religiously, if it's not on RCDB, it doesn't count as a ride. That's not a coaster. And yet, RCDB on their counts, if you look at their parks, it says how many roller coasters do they have, and unequivocally, they have racers counting as 1. But
under the listing, there are 2 separate length listings, 2 separate speed listings, 2 separate height listings. So for rides like Rebel Yell, and I'm looking at Gemini right now, and Lightning Racer and Gwazi, and regardless of how different the tracks are, there are 2 separate listings for the statistics. So
no, I know.
But I think they're labeled under the same ride because they have the same name. Right? That's probably why they're in one listing.
There are a number that, almost all of them that you could say are significantly different. They all have different names for the tracks. So you have Dragon Challenge, you have the Chinese Fireball, and you have the Hungarian Horntail. For Gwazi, you have Lion and Tiger. For Lightning Racer, you have Thunder and Lightning. So technically they're under the same name, but all of them have individual names for their tracks, too. And maybe that has something to do with it in my mind as well, that the park has taken the time to name these 2 rides something different, to distinguish them. That really Gemini and racers are usually distinguished by what? By color.
By color.
It's
red,
usually
blue, or red, black.
Exactly.
In the case of the old Colossus. usually by train color, Rebel Yell. Now, Rebel Yell this year at King's Dominion was doing something interesting. They were running one of each color on each track. So red would race blue, and red would be over here and blue would be over here, but then the next two trains it would be red and blue.
Oh,
so
man.
So they would do one of each on each track, so you can't even call it that. You have to do left and right.
Screwing with the enthusiasts there, that King's Dominion.
Which
man,
one's
sending
red,
everyone.
Which one's blue, which one did I ride before? I don't know.
So why, I'm curious to find out why you count racers as two, besides you're a credit whore. Besides that.
Oh, yeah, I'm a credit whore. I think... Sorry, you caught me off guard with that. I would go back to the argument that... And I kind of made this argument, I think, before we went on the air. And like I said, there's one big drawback to this argument, is if you start in a station... When you come back to that station, that's one. So, in the case of Rebel Yell or Racer or Lightning Racer or Gwazi or Dragon Challenge, when you start at the station, you come... Well, Dragon Challenge actually not even, because there's a separate unload platform, just like Millennium Force and Dragster, and it's just a different station that goes right to the loading area. So technically I haven't been all the way around the Millennium Force circuit because I haven't gotten the transfer track credit there. But for all intents and purposes,
I have,
know
so
you have.
I get the credit.
Yeah, you made sure to contact me the night that you got that credit.
So I've actually done Dragster as well. I've done the little turnaround on Dragster too.
There.
Yeah.
The other way I've heard it put, and for the people who are wondering, the Kennywood Racer, I count that as one total because it's one complete continuous circuit. When you start on the left, you end on the right, so you've only been halfway around. So in that case, I do only count the Kennywood Racer as one. And shameless plug for our coaster poll that I just started up, but most people who are sending me stuff count the Kennywood Racer as one and all the others as two separate tracks.
What?
Which is interesting. That's kind of one thing that everyone universally agrees on, that the Kennywood Racer is only one, and Grand National at Blackpool Pleasure Beach is the other one, and then I think there's one in Mexico or Brazil that's a Mobius coaster, but everyone seems to universally agree that that's only one. But as far as the others, nobody, there's really a big disagreement. And the other argument that I've kind of made is, can one operate without the other? And the answer for the Kennywood Racer is no. You can't operate only one side and have only one side. You still need the full ride crew to run it. If you're only running one side of Lightning Racer, which they never do, but the one side of Gwazi. One side of Gwazi has been closed for a couple years now, and all things point to that's a permanent closure. They've been running the other side of Gwazi by itself for a couple years now, and it doesn't hinder the operation of it at all. Whereas, same thing with, a Racer at Kings Island or a Rebel Yell at Kings Dominion. You can run one side of the coaster independently of the other. And if you knock... This is the other argument. If you knock the structure down of one, or if you tore up the tracks of one, the other one can still operate. If you tore up the track of the lift on one side of the Kennywood Racer... let's say just the track here. Let's say you took the chain off of the lift hill of one side of the Kennywood Racer. It can't go all the way around the track, whereas the others, it can, and can continually do laps around that circuit, independently of the removed chain lift.
I see your point. I'm not going to sit here and say that you're absolutely crazy. I see your point. It makes sense. I might contest that sometimes if you're destroying the other half of the ride, maybe the lift hill could not stand on its own because of the way it's been built, because it's usually supported downwards. So if you take off one side, it's not going to have that support anymore. You'd have to actually leave both sides of the track up probably just because of the way the wood is built. That's
right.
nitpicking,
That's the way it's
though.
engineered as a structure itself.
Yeah. Yeah. I just go, like I said, I go back to the fact that you had two parks in this race for most coasters ever, and neither of them are counting it as two. And to me, as we're going to see with our next topic in a little bit, like, to me, it's always, I kind of tend to lean towards what the park says. And I know a lot of people have been questioning what parks say, especially after this off season with the Six Flags and the Super Loops and being called coasters. And it's just naturally going to lead us into the pipe scream and the powered coaster debate and whether or not powered coasters should count. And so we'll have to, we obviously disagree on the racers. You have your reasons. To me, they're not different enough to justify a new credit. And I understand you can get into clones and you can say, well, you have 6 Batman credits. They're all clones. How can you say that one is okay, whatever. I get that there's holes in every logic that you've pointed out holes in yours. I've pointed out holes. So obviously no way of counting is ever going to be perfect because really, at the end of the day, it's just made up anyway. So, moving on to
how many we've all been on and whether, I mean, you pointed out, you said, if I counted all the racers I've been on as 2 instead of 1, I've probably been on 310 instead of 300. Okay, is it that big of a deal? So, instead of 399, I've probably been on like 386 or something if we do it that way.
Exactly.
It's probably not even that many. I don't think I've been on that many racers.
So with that in mind, let's move on to powered coasters and see that there's a lot of debate here too. And the general rule I've heard in the past is if it looks like a coaster, like basically the statement is I know a coaster when I see it.
It's a pretty abstract concept.
Yeah.
It's being able to spot one.
It's like some kind of like Baroque art or like, Renaissance or Rococo art. And, that's obviously Rococo art. No, it's a roller coaster. So, so it's like, okay, so you say you know a coaster. So what is a roller coaster? And we've had this debate before too, trying to nail down what a roller coaster is. And a lot of people do not count discos as roller coasters. Even within my own count, I don't count standard discos as roller coasters, even though I might think that they are sometimes. However, what I do count are the extended discos. Rides like Surf Dog, Route 66, Pipe Scream opening up just this year at Cedar Point. Mm-hmm. And the reason why I count them as roller coasters is if you ever talk to a park official, the park officials who are in the know, who have talked to the maintenance people, are pretty adamant about them being roller coasters. I know down at Kings Island, you had Don, the PR guy. When pressed, he will say Surf Dog is a roller coaster. You have Cedar Point this year putting Pipe Scream on their roller coaster listing. Last year when Annie Zelm was the PR person, she even made a statement at one of the Great Ohio events saying that, I hope you come back next year when we open up our 17th roller coaster. And everyone kind of just like looks at each other and like snarls at each other. Right. It was kind of funny. I started clapping and then I'm like, I'm the only one clapping here. Oh, sorry. It's the coaster snobs. You guys don't think Pipe Scream's a coaster. And I can't figure out why not. Why some people count Pipe Scream as a coaster, or don't count it as a coaster, but then are perfectly fine with counting an Inamin as like an Inamin impulse coaster as a roller coaster, or better yet, even the mine trains that we brought up earlier that are completely powered throughout.
Well, okay, so let me ask a few questions here, and I just lost the one that I was going to ask. But so the one that I think is interesting that doesn't really get brought up is we don't count the discos, right? Or most people don't count the discos, the standard discos, or the extended discos for that matter. What about like Half Pipe at Elitch Gardens or Avatar Airbender? Like, and I'm not trying to make an argument for my case because I don't personally count the discos or the extended discos as coasters. I've only been on a few of them, but that's one that people universally seem to say, oh, but that one's a roller coaster. And
well, the general theory and the difference between the two, and this is the point, the sticking point, which I have a hard time swallowing at the end of the night, is a lot of people will say, well, the half pipes and the impulse coasters are coasters because the powering system is on the track and not on the train, versus your discos, the powering system, the actual engine part of it is on the train versus on the track, but yet the track still has the electricity on it. So like, this is the minor distinction that people are making. And they're making the distinction based on where is the power source. Is it on the train? Is it on the car, the ride vehicle, or is it on the track? Mm-hmm. And to me, it doesn't matter. To me, I would almost count if left on an island by myself and never having talked to any coaster enthusiasts in the world and asked point blank, is a disco coaster a roller coaster? Just by looking at it, being on that island, I would probably say yes. Because to me, does it roll? Yes. Does it coast? Yes. Is it on some sort of track? Yes. Those are like my three big examples.
Yeah, I would tend to agree with that argument. I wouldn't have any problem with that.
So I've only been on a few of the standard discos. I've been on the one at Kennywood and I've been on the one at Dollywood. And out of peer pressure is basically why I don't count them. Even though if pressed in front of a gun, in front of God Almighty, if he asked me, is this a roller coaster? I would probably have to say yes. Right. And this seems to be one of those topics. People get real heated when you start talking about Surf Dog being a roller coaster. Well, people get really pissed.
Has Kings Island always called Surf Dog a coaster?
Here's the problem. Kings Island on their website does not have a special section for roller coasters.
Not like Cedar Point's really the only park that actually has that, right?
Cedar Point's the only park that publicly calls Pipe Scream and that ride type a roller coaster.
Because it's on the roller coaster like subpage. All the other parks just have thrill rides, and they kind of stick it in there.
Absolutely.
So it could be a flat, it could be a coaster, it could be a flacoaster. Something in between.
Yeah. So down at Kings Island though, when you're good at making up words lately.
Yeah.
What was our word last week?
Enthusiasm, I think I said.
Yeah, enthusiasm.
I probably should have been enthusiasm. I said enthusiasm. I think EV from Coaster Radio used the enthusiasm word a few weeks ago. That's probably why it was in my head. But anyway, he was like enthusiasm.
So anywho, now, like I said before, if, unofficially Kings Island was calling Surf Dog a roller coaster because their PR guy down there, Don Helbig, he basically said, I think this is a roller coaster. And my theory is I've watched it run. And when we were down at Banshee Media Day, I sat in front of Surf Dog for a good 15 to 20 minutes. And I saw probably about 4 to 5 cycles on it. And as I was watching, the ride is different every single time. So it's not like Max Air, where every single time you get the same exact rotation and you end up at the same exact point every single time. This ride has a lot of variation based on how it moves on its wave. Also this year, we saw that Pipe Scream actually valleyed. So when a coaster valleys, it kind of says to me, now you can make other arguments too, I understand. Maybe the engine wasn't strong enough to get it over that day. I don't know. But to me, at some point when a coaster valleys, it says that it's probably coasting of its own power at some point. And I find it very difficult to believe that Pipe Scream throughout its whole 3-minute ride cycle is not coasting at some point. Now, the question is it coasting enough for some people? And then I bring up things like Blazing Fury and Fire in the Hole and all these other rides that count as coasters that are undeniably roller coasters according to most, but have very little coaster section on it. Gringotts, for example. I almost want to say Gringotts is very difficult to call it a coaster from what you said. Maybe even Wonder Mountain is in that same book as well.
Well, yeah, that's what I was going to bring up is Wonder Mountain. The more and more that I ride that ride, the more and more I'm convinced that they put the lift hill and that little drop thing outside just to call it a coaster, because after you go inside that mountain, there is no coaster at all. I mean, spoiler alert, sorry to spoil that before here, but I don't think I'm giving anything away by saying there is no. You know, maybe you're even disappointed and you're glad you know that, so you're not disappointed when you ride it. That little lift hill and the 20, 25-foot drop out there before you go into the mountain, that's all there is that's roller coaster. Once you get inside that mountain, you're being powered along the track that's in there for the entire portion, the remainder of the ride. The rest of it is like the interactive portion of the ride. I describe it as 10% coaster, 85% dark ride.
And to be honest with you, after riding Gringotts last weekend, I would say Gringotts is pretty much the same. That it's a coaster portion at the front, and then after that, and it's hard to tell because it's a lot of video screens like you're used to at Universal.
Right.
The ride vehicle itself is very reminiscent of what Mummy is, but Mummy has a significant coaster portion inside of it. Gringotts, if you're expecting that, not to ruin it for you, but Gringotts does not have that significant roller coaster portion inside, or not that I've seen.
That's what I've been told. It's not quite. I've heard it's not quite Revenge of the Mummy in terms of coaster. Revenge of the Mummy has actual arena portions, and originally I thought Wonder Mountain's Guardian was going to have some sort of arena where it was, that's what they call it on Revenge of the Mummy, they call it the coaster arena. There is no coaster arena. I said 10% coaster at the beginning, 85% dark ride, and then there's a little 5% at the end where it does a little something special that I won't spoil for those of you who haven't ridden it. There is a little bit, and if you've read Ryan's reports on it and the Ride Gallery article, he doesn't talk about the last part of the ride and what it does. It does some neat little stuff at the end, but I'll leave that for you guys to find out on your own. So I'm pretty convinced that they put that drop in there at the beginning of the ride just to kind of say that it's a coaster, because really it's just a dark ride. I would say that like a Blazing Fury or a Fire in the Hole or even a Black Diamond, which we talked about before we went on the air, does go down in an ever so slight downgrade during its dark ride rooms. I would say those are even more coasters, and of all the roller coasters I've been on, I would say that Wonder Mountain's Guardian is probably the closest to not being a roller coaster, just because of what it is. And I would even call the Smoky Mountain Alpine coaster and those kind of things more, because those things are legitimate roller coasters. The Smoky Mountain one was the first one I had been on. That's a legitimate roller coaster, even though it's, the brake is hand powered and you can vary your own speed. That's a legitimate roller coaster, that thing.
Well, and maybe we should talk about, we weren't planning on talking about that, but I've only been on one Alpine coaster, and it's up here in Illinois, there's an Alpine coaster, and basically all that was a concrete trough built to the side of a mountain where you just go down. But the Alpine coasters, like especially in the Smoky Mountains, those things have real track, hills
real
up.
brakes, real hills that you're going at a slight upgrade. They have like real forces, and like the Smoky Mountain one, the braking device. There's a braking device on the track. For those of you who don't know how they work, you have a hand brake, and essentially you push the brake all the way forward to go full speed. And you can go literally no brakes all the way down, and there is a mechanism on the entire track that keeps you from going over 28 miles per hour, because it's specifically engineered that there's some turns in there that have some pretty strong lateral forces because they're not banked very much. Because some people like to go slower and enjoy the view, and other people like to go, balls to the wall and go full speed all the way, which is what we did. And it was my sister and I on the same cart, so we got moving pretty good. And you can actually feel the braking mechanism kick in a little bit when you're on one of the long downhill portions right before you get to a turn, where it does kind of keep you from accelerating more. And you can't take it's like a wild mouse. You don't want to take those turns much faster. So it has this braking mechanism in it, but for the most part, you're really coasting through the entire thing. And it was nice because you have to kind of watch out for the group in front of you. We were the first people on it in the day, so literally there was nobody in front of us, so we were able to we were a haul in the mail all the way down. And I mean, the track is over a mile long. Like, the lift hill itself takes like 4 minutes to get up to the top of the mountain, and then it takes 3 to get back down. So altogether, it's like 7 minutes you're on this thing, and it's not cheap, but it's cool.
To me, like, that sounds like I haven't been on it, obviously, but to me, that sounds like what a roller coaster is.
Yeah,
that in its simplest essence. Yeah, like in its simplest essence. I know our good friend Brian Bass tried to troll us one evening by posting some pictures in the Coaster Consortium and saying, roller coaster or not, go. So, obviously there's a lot of people out there that debate this. Now, I think there are Alpine coasters, and I don't know if there's different terminology for them. I'm not really up to date on them, because I know there's a website I use, Coast to Coaster, that gives you a map that uses basically RCDB, that gives you a map of where all the roller coasters in the world are. And they actually have.
Are they?
I know, but they're not. But this website actually uses RCDB, but then has extra information added for all the Alpine coasters, and they have 4 different designations for Alpine coasters. And I'll see if I can try and find them real quick.
Yeah, there's some people call them Alpine coasters, or mountain coasters are the most common. I've heard some people will call them Alpine slides, because I think they kind of originated with what you're talking about. There's one in Kentucky, I think, and I don't even know if it's open anymore, where it was literally just like a concrete trough. Sounds a lot like what you're talking about, where it was almost like a concrete water slide built into the ground, where you were just on a cart on wheels, and it was essentially a bobsled. And that's more kind of like what it was, and that's where the Alpine slide terminology, I think, originated from. People were like, okay, now let's make them actual coasters. Go ahead.
This guy, COASTER.com, awesome website. He has 5 of these types of coasters on there. One, he has the Alpine coaster. Mm-hmm. Then he has something called the Brazo, Braso. Then he has the Bob Cart. Then he has something called the Soro, Soro, and then he has Unknown. So obviously there's different distinctions here, and I have no idea what these distinctions mean, but there are places out there that obviously are categorizing these types of rides. Now, I'm not quite sure where he places the one I was on, because that I really want to see that.
I would guess that might be on like the Bob's one.
I'm thinking,
in its simplest sense, that's really more of a bobsled, where you're in an actual trough, because you're not attached to anything. You're not attached to an actual track like you are on the Smoky Mountain Alpine coaster, or the new one that opened in Gatlinburg, because now there's 2 down there in Pigeon Forge.
So the one that I was on at Chestnut Mountain out on the western edge of Illinois, it's actually classified as a Soro, so whatever that means. The one down in Dollywood is classified as an Alpine coaster.
Right.
So
it's in the name, the Smoky Mountain. Now, I don't know if now there's the Smoky Mountain Alpine coaster, which is actually in like Pigeon Forge, but then there's another one that I think just opened up in Gatlinburg, which is different, and that one's called the Gatlinburg Mountain Coaster. So Mountain Coaster, Alpine Coaster, the terminology is, they're basically synonymous, but the one in Gatlinburg is essentially the same type of thing, where you're actually attached to a track, and I don't know who actually builds these, And maybe that's something I have to look into. But like,
there's
it's like
one
the same company because they all kind of look the same, and they all have like the same carts.
Well, there's the one in Pigeon Forge, I believe. Let me see. Where's I just lost it. Pigeon Forge. Where'd it go?
And I don't know where the new one in Gatlinburg is in relation to the other one. But I know they're fairly close to each other.
So there's two there. One is classified as a Soro in Gatlinburg, and that's by Fun Construct. And then the one in Pigeon Forge is an Alpine coaster, and that's by Weigand, Weigand. So these are the two companies that are basically building all of these.
So they're classified
differently,
the Gatling, though.
Yes,
That's
according to Coast to Coaster, they are classified differently.
We'll have to figure out what the distinction is between all those.
I think it has something to do with, because the two, it probably has to do with what type of trough it uses. So like I know the one at Chestnut Mountain is basically the cart has wheels and it's on a concrete trough, versus this new one is actually on steel rails.
Right, it's on a legitimate track.
Yeah.
It's
so maybe that seems to be the biggest. Yeah, that seems to be the biggest distinction between those two, is that. In any case, though, I would be safe to say that probably most of these, especially the metal track ones, that's definitely a roller coaster in my book. I'm not sold that the concrete trough is a roller coaster. I'm kind of sold though that the metal track is.
That's kind of closer to a water slide, isn't it? Like Mountain Slidewinder at Dollywood, the big water slide bobsled thing you're kind of in like a rubber boat. I mean, that's not really on wheels. It's not quite a roller coaster, but I guess it's not that different. You're not locked to anything, but I mean, again, La Vibora, you're not really locked to anything either. It's just wheels and a trough.
Exactly.
So if you stick water in the La Vibora trough where it rains, does it not count as a coaster anymore? I don't know.
Well,
that's a different discussion altogether.
And now that you bring that up, it raises the question of what's the difference between a metal trough and a concrete trough? Like, at the end of the day, is there any difference there? Like, it's still a trough with.
The problem is that we need a third. We need a third column in our spreadsheets now to rank concrete coasters.
Steel, wood, concrete.
Hey, maybe we can throw like Outlaw Run and Goliath and all those RMCs that people can't decide what they are in that category. We'll just wood, steel, other, and maybe for shiggles we'll throw. That's another word I've created. Shiggles. That's
nice.
That's a nice contraction.
Yeah, we get it.
If you can't figure that one out, then sorry.
You don't need to.
But we could throw El Toro in that mix too, just because people don't know what to call that, because they're like, oh, it's wood, but it doesn't feel like wood. That's a wood coaster. Come on.
I call it wood. Yeah, just like I call Goliath at Six Flags Great America wood. I call El Toro wood. It's wood. Were there any other ride types you wanted to talk about here?
Well, let me look at the poll you put up, because we did put a poll up here on the Coaster Consortium.
Oh, we did, yes.
Most people were talking about all the things that should be counted. Most people are the one that got the most check marks and the most votes is different layout racers, like a Lightning Racer or Dragon Challenge. Next, I believe we had racers, just regular racers like Gemini and Racer at Kings Island. But there are a few people who did not vote for that one that voted for the other, yourself being one of them. So we can look at that. After that, it went kiddie coasters, which I think is one that really doesn't get too much debate about what actually counts as a new credit. Then we had,
there's some people out there that say you should not be able to get a kiddie coaster credit if you are an adult. That's generally the debate out there. I don't subscribe to that. Yeah. If it's a coaster, it's a coaster.
I think that's an excuse that the people who refuse to ride kiddie
coasters
make. I think that's an argument that they
make.
Like,
seriously.
Because... Go ahead. You get a cat.
Hey, some kiddie coasters go faster than some kiddie coasters go faster than flying turns. So
Some of them.
do you not count flying turns as a credit then? Because it looks like a kiddie coaster to me.
Hey, what are you talking about, man?
No, I'm talking to my buddy on here. We're
About
talking roller coasters.
None of the roller coasters.
Any of them. What roller coaster do you like?
Vortex, King's Island.
Oh God, that's terrible. Vortex. We got a Vortex fan here. I like Raptor at Cedar Point. Have you been to Cedar Point before?
Not yet.
Not yet? Oh, you need to go tomorrow. I'll be there tomorrow. I'll see you there. Oh, okay.
I'll be working.
Gotta make money somehow.
We knew that was going to happen at some point, didn't we?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely.
That was great. Anyway, back to the poll. How about it? Yeah, a little bit. Anyway, the kiddie coaster, I think the argument that kiddie coasters don't count is a lame excuse that the people who refuse to ride kiddie coasters make. I've always been a firm believer, and a lot of your ACE members that might skew older may or may not skew older. The argument that a lot of ACE people will make, and the argument that I make, is a good roller coaster enthusiast will ride any roller coaster regardless of its size.
Yeah, no, I agree with that.
And I always like that because it's like big, small, wood, steel, slow, fast. They're all roller coasters, and at the end of the day, that's what brings us all together in the first place. So,
well, I had one person on our COASTER.net forums, our good friend Steel Rock, and Steel Rock says that he doesn't think that retheming, repainting, even turning things backwards or whatever is enough to get a new credit. So he goes out there and he says that he will not be counting Rougarou as a new credit. However, if you significantly change the ride, like with New Texas Giant, Iron Rattler, changing it from wood to steel, he says absolutely that is definitely a new credit. So here we have one person. Now, most of the people I've heard have said that they will be counting Rougarou as a new credit. So Steel Rock here is actually one of the first people that I've read is not counting as a new credit. I'm sure there's more out there too that won't be counting as a new credit. Right. So it's and he also happens to say that he counts racers as two. So that's a little bit interesting as well.
Yeah, that's interesting, and I think it's something that we didn't talk a whole lot about. And you put Rougarou on the poll here, and it says rides with new trains. And that got not quite as many as the kiddie coasters. It got more than powered coasters, like the Thunder Run at Canada's Wonderland. Not quite as many as the racers. And it got the same number of votes as relocated coasters, like Apocalypse at Six Flags America used to be Iron Wolf. That's something we didn't even really get into. But I think we can kind of lump that into this last point that I'll make that I wanted to bring up is how much of a change do you need to call it a new ride? And before we maybe kick around a few ideas on that, I'll just read off the rest of them here. Only one person voted for the standard discos that are just the U-shaped discos, so I think most people are on board with not counting that. Rethemed rides only got a couple of votes. We're talking about Disaster Transport from Avalanche Run, and that'll come into the how significant of a change do you need. A few people voted for the extended discos, like yourself. The half pipes, same deal. A couple people voting for those. So for the most part, it looks like almost nobody counts the regular U-shaped discos, and most people count racers and different layout racers and kiddie coasters and powered coasters as coasters. So then the gray area in between
Here is my question. If you count powered coasters, why aren't you counting extended discos or discos? Well, because essentially they're the same thing.
That's the interesting thing, because a lot more people voted for the powered coasters but not extended discos. Yeah. So it's interesting where the disconnect is with those. And I'm one of those people. I don't count the extended discos. Maybe one day I will. Who knows? But the powered coasters I count. So I think one of the last things we have to discuss here is, we're getting ready to wrap up here. What constitutes a significant enough change to call something a new credit? And I go back to And it has to be somewhat subjective somewhere along the line because as to what you consider a significant change. Because I personally have myself down for 3 Rebel Yell credits, both sides forwards, but I also rode one of the tracks backwards back in 2007. And like, if I've ridden Batman backwards at Great America, when I go back to Great America next time and it's running forwards and I run it forwards, I'm going to count it as a new credit. Riding that ride backwards makes that enough of a new credit. But I'll put a little asterisk by this, that on like the trains where the train is specifically designed to face 2 different directions, like the inverted boomerangs, where the nature of the ride is they're not changing the ride. So if I face one way and then face the other, I won't count it as 2, and I don't know anyone that does. Which I know that's completely an argument against my own. That's an argument against my own point. But for me, riding a ride that's intended to be forwards and turning the train around so that it's a new experience, I'll count that as a new coaster, which is weird, I think, based on what I just said. But, like, the retheming from Avalanche Run to Disaster Transport, I don't know. I'm glad I don't have to make that decision, because I don't know if I'd be able to make a good decision on that either way, because, okay, the experience is changing drastically, but the track itself is not changing. So does that constitute it's the same thing with Rougarou and Mantis. The floor, changing the position of the rider from standing to sitting I don't think anyone would argue that that's not a significant change to the ride. But is it enough to count it as a new credit because the track itself isn't changing? So I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. What are your thoughts on that? And then I have one more question for you after I get your thoughts.
I don't know. It's because when you start talking about significant change, you could bring up relocated coasters. So if you're significantly changing the environment it's in, like Busch Gardens had a Wild Mouse there, and they moved it down to Tampa. They're 2 different scenery sets, just like Disaster Transport, different scenery. You're not changing the track of the steel track, though. However, you look at Hades 360, you're significantly changing the track there. That's why I was almost hoping that Cedar Point was going to add some track onto Mantis to put it more out over the water. That way it would make my decision. Yeah, but they're making it real difficult on me by just changing the train. Cedar Point, what are you doing?
Well, yeah, the whole case with Hades is they replaced a hill with a corkscrew, and then they also lowered the turnaround. So even though it's only a portion of the ride, it's a significant alteration. I know several people, not several, but I know at least a few people who count Son of Beast as 2 credits because they rode it with and without the loop. So, and that's just one element.
I think there's a case there. I really believe there's a case there.
Yeah, because that is whether you like Son of Beast or not, or you rode it or you didn't, you can't argue that wasn't a significant change to the ride, even though it's one element. It's a very tiny part of the ride. It's a significant change to the ride, and the whole train change that came along with that. You're not changing the position of the rider. It's like when Wildcat at Hershey went from PTC trains to Millennium Flyers. That to me isn't enough of a change. You're not changing the position of the rider. You're changing a restraint. Some of the premier launch coasters went from shoulder harnesses to lap bars. That to me wouldn't be a big enough change. My question for you here right now is, because you brought it up earlier about a lot of times you seem to refer to the park. When you go to some of the Six Flags parks next year, what about those Larson Super Loopers that they're calling coasters, but most people are saying, nah, I don't think so.
Well, here's the problem with those is the problem is that I see the extended disco. The park is calling it a roller coaster. When I look at it, I kind of get the sense that it's a coaster too. To me, it seems like a roller coaster. The Super Loops, it's just such a difficult leap.
Those look so much more like a flat ride than the disc. I'll even say they look more like flat rides than the discos.
Like it has wheels, it has a track, but the problem is that the train is on a circular piece that's just circling around, you have to change almost your entire concept of what a roller coaster is to be able to fit that into the model. And to me, I just can't. I will not be calling the Super Loops roller coasters next year.
And I think the fundamental difference between the discos and the Super Loopers are that the Super Loopers don't actually coast.
Yeah.
They don't actually coast.
Well,
they're powered throughout the entire ride, and they do speed up, but they're always attached to the actual power supply, which gets back into that argument we had before. But the discos, at least in essence, seem to coast at least maybe a little bit. And like even the powered coasters, like Thunder Run at Canada's Wonderland, when you ride that, you can feel that it does get faster as it's going down the helix. So yeah, it kind of has the power supply on it, and it's constantly powered, but it does have an actual change in speed due to gravity, whereas the Super Loops, they can stop whenever they want.
And I don't even want to bring up Byron curves at this point either, because that's another one. It's like the Super Loops. It's like
just on
you have a power source. It's just really, you have so many different things of people trying to create like mini coasters and simple, portable coasters, and I think that's where the Byron curve comes from. That's where these Super Loops come from, trying to give you that experience without actually making a roller coaster.
Right.
So at the end of the day, at the end of the day, I'm not quite sure if you're ever going to create, and we've tried, I know you're trying currently to create what is and what is not a roller coaster. You get into so much minutia that I ride a ride like Dudley Do-Right's Ripsaw Falls at Islands of Adventure. And man, I'll tell you what, there are two distinct areas in that ride that have a hill and have wheels, and you're flying over it like any airtime hill on Phoenix.
Yeah, we didn't even touch on those. I mean,
man,
you have Dudley Do-Right, and someone brought up the point of, I don't know where it was, and I forget who it was. Maybe it was even in that topic. Let me look through the poll here. I don't even, it doesn't, maybe it was even Brian Bass who said it, but the fact that the Mack water coasters are considered coasters and then like a Dudley Do-Right or a Splash Mountain isn't, is really kind of strange. But I don't know.
Especially,
people don't seem to argue about that as much, I guess.
Well, it's I know a lot of people just say, well, if it's on my coaster counter, if it's on RCDB, then we just accept it as a roller coaster. The problem is within those systems there are there's paradoxes, there's contradictions in there that some rides follow rules and some rides don't follow rules. And I love RCDB. I think it's one of the greatest websites ever, but I've pointed out that there are some things in there that don't mix well with each other. And I think for the most part, it's an awesome resource. It's the resource I use when I go to the parks to find out what rides I need to ride. But I don't think that it's the end all be all like some people treat it as. And a lot of people who treat it as the end all be all then go ahead and count racers as two anyway, even though he doesn't. So
right, well, at
there
least
you
there's
go.
not two separate entries, and at the end of the day, it's like, okay, RCDB is right, yeah. At the end of the day, RCDB is really only one man's opinion, but for the most part, I think, aside from a few nitpicky things that we've touched on tonight, I think for the most part, people kind of agree with him. I'd say 90 to 95% of the time, it's pretty good, probably even more. I mean, there's really a few in there that you can make the argument for. Like Harry Potter and the Forbidden Journey, that model name is a Robo Coaster, but I mean, okay, come on now. So I don't know. I think we've had a good discussion here. I think you and I agree on certain points as far as the whole gravity power thing and like the mountain coaster, the Alpine coasters. And I think I can tell. I think you're kind of leaning towards wanting to count Rougarou. I think I've sort of convinced you that you're probably going to count it as a new one.
I'm probably going to count it.
I'm going to have to keep working on you with the racers.
The racers, I don't know. I see the point with the racers. I don't like racers to begin with most of the time. that there are very few racers that I actually want to ride twice. So
Yeah, I mean, like Dragon Challenge, I always you get drastically different experiences on those two, and like a Lightning Racer, you get the similar experience, but it's different enough where you want to ride the other side. It rides like Racer and Rebel Yell. It's like those are good rides. They're not spectacular rides. They're not really going to be in any seasoned rider's top 10 list. Unless it's for nostalgia purposes. But they're good rides. They're fun rides. But it's almost like if you're at a park for a first time and there's like a 45-minute wait for it, it's like, I don't really want to waste another – I don't really want – you're not wasting 45 minutes, but it's like, do I really want to wait 45 minutes to really kind of ride the same ride? Or maybe I can cheat a little bit. It's like, I don't know.
And that's the other reason too. The other reason too is that a lot of times parks don't have both sides of the racers open. So if they only have one side, it leads to frustration on my part where I'm like, oh, I can't even ride the other side, so I miss out on that credit. So it's like, well, to avoid that, I'll just make it so that they count as one. Done. See?
Right. So, and I got
Finished.
lucky when we went down to Carowinds in August because they only had one side of Thunder Road running, but it was the side I didn't ride 4 years ago. So I was like, yes!
Score.
Challenge accepted. Accomplishment complete. Achievement unlocked.
Well,
ride both sides of a racing wooden coaster, but ride them both while they were only running by themselves on 2 separate visits.
Yes.
So now my sister and aunt both don't have the other side yet, but I do.
Well, I think at this point, I think we've come to our conclusion here this evening. I think, like you said, we had a pretty good discussion. So tomorrow I'm going to ride Mantis, or not, probably tomorrow or Sunday, depending on how things go. I'm going to ride Mantis for the last time. Yeah, I don't think anyone's really going to miss it, to be honest with you. It's going to be better as a floorless. Like, no one's saying it's not. Like, there's not a person in the world that's saying.
I'm riding
maybe
Hydra
you.
Tomorrow.
I don't know.
I'm riding Hydra tomorrow. Those green floorless trains look awfully familiar. Maybe Hydra will turn into a stand-up coaster. Wouldn't that be awesome to go through the JoJo roll with a bicycle seat being rammed into your crotch?
Oh no. Well, on that note, I think we should end it. So I'd like to thank everyone for joining us here again on COASTER-net Uncut. The response to the videos have been awesome. So please, if you have any questions, comments, post in the consortium, post on COASTER-net.com. We will be more than happy to get you involved on the next show because we have a great time.
And if people got a topic they want us to talk about, give us some ideas. We're always looking for some ideas to debate about. I think our last couple of shows, we've had some pretty heated debates. We had the B&M Intamin debate a couple weeks ago. That one got a lot of people fired up. So hopefully we can continue that trend. So we don't want to run out of stuff to talk about after like 20 weeks here. So give us your ideas.
So on that, I'm of course Andrew Barczyk, usually from Chicago, Illinois, but here tonight I am from Maumee, Ohio.
And I'm Danny Miller, normally from Rochester, but this time from my hometown, Schnecksville near Allentown. And a special thanks to that drunk dude in the hotel that made a special guest.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you, drunk guy. And as always, ride on, Ride Warriors.
See you next time.